Do we turn tail and go 180 degrees that way, running away from the storm, or do we cross its path? Now, just like in any life decision, you weigh the pros and cons. Well, there was a problem. If we were to turn around, we might be caught in the strongest part of a northern hemisphere hurricane, the right-hand quadrant. And that's where the direction of the storm and the winds combine to be the strongest place where, let's just say, you don't want to be. Or we could try and cross the storm's path, but then we might be closer to the eye. Well, that's when I said, I'm just the chief scientist. You're the captain. You decide. And he actually decided the best thing to do was to cross the path of the storm, which we did. Our problem there was that we were afraid we were going to be pretty close to the eye, and we ended up being about 120 miles from the eye of the hurricane. We had a little bit of damage on board and one very minor injury, but as a scientist, and this again I think is something really important in science, no matter what field you go into, as a scientist I am endlessly curious. And I just couldn't help myself. And so I put my foul weather gear on, I strapped my safety gear, and I went up on deck in the middle of the hurricane. The wind was so strong it was shearing the tops of the waves off, so you couldn't tell how big they were. The rain was horizontal, and because there was so much moisture in the atmosphere, it was lightning pink. It was really interesting. And that's one of those things I say, now, don't do this at home, but we had safety gear on, and we were all set, so it was pretty safe. But again, it was funny because that was my first trip when I was working for that organization, and all I could think of was, this wasn't in my contract. So let me tell you a little bit about living underwater. I have been very fortunate to have been involved with undersea habitat programs for quite a while. When I was between my junior and senior year in college, I had the great fortune to get a job called safety diver for the small undersea lab at the time called Hydrolab in St. Croix. Now let me tell you, safety or support diver is really a euphemism for underwater slave. Anything and everything that needed to be done, that was my job underwater. The best summer job I've ever had. Not a lot of pay, made great contacts, and it had a huge influence on my life because it was at a time where I was thinking, this science stuff is kind of cool. Maybe I want to be a marine scientist. But I was sort of intimidated by science and the idea of becoming a scientist. Well, one mission underwater changed that. There was a team of scientists living underwater to study parrotfish. And those are the fish shown right in the end there. Let's see if you can see it. I think my thing just died. Oh, there it is. But the parrotfish on the lower right, notice one really outstanding characteristic of those parrotfish. They have big buck teeth. Well, coral reefs live in waters that are nutrient poor. And so scientists are always trying to figure out, well, how do they do that? We've long thought that parrotfish play a big role because with those big buck teeth, they're really efficient grazers. They go around the surfaces of the reef, scraping algae off the surface, and then think about, just as they are efficient grazers, they're also prodigious poopers. So all the stuff they take off the reef goes back in, and we think they're very important in recycling nutrients in coral reefs, and that's one reason why corals can live in nutrient-poor water. Well, a team of scientists came to quantify recycling by parrotfish. So now I want you all to picture some very well-respected scientists on scuba gear carrying little plastic bags, following behind the parrotfish. Yes, I think you're getting it. Collecting their poop. And that is when I said, if collecting parrotfish poop is science, I can do it. So I decided I could become a marine scientist. Now I put that picture up in the right-hand corner because that's from one of the older habitats called Sea Lab. And back then they actually had a dolphin that helped them and brought them tools. We don't have that now. But let me just say, the reason to live underwater is because it gives you time and access to do research. For instance, if you're living at 50 feet, you have 6 to 9 hours a day diving down to 100 feet. If you were to try and work at 100 feet from the surface, if you were lucky, you might have 30 minutes a day. So imagine trying to do a survey or experiments or collect samples at 100 feet if you only have 30 minutes a day versus 6 to 9 hours a day. And that's why people live underwater. It's to get time and access undersea. Well, today, there's only one undersea research station, and that's Aquarius Reef Base, and it sits about 4 miles offshore Key Largo in a little sandy patch called Conch Reef. It's owned by NOAA and run by the University of North Carolina at Wilmington. Aquarius, here's a picture of the undersea lab. The bottom there is at about 62 feet. The top of the lab is at about 45 feet. It's 43 feet in diameter, 43 feet long, 9 feet in diameter. You can kind of think of it as a big mobile home. It's fixed on the bottom. It doesn't move around. We do about 8 missions per year, 1 to 2 weeks each. And when you have a mission, you have 6 aquanauts inside. And that means you might have 4 scientists and 2 of our expert staff technicians. You might have, right now, in fact, this very moment, there is a Navy mission going on, and there could be Navy SEALs training in Aquarius. We also train astronauts. Living undersea is the closest thing they've found to being in space. We also have a complement of people on shore. It's just like a mission control for the space station. We have a mission control in Key Largo that monitors life support systems, communicates with them 24 hours a day. Well, you can't just start living underwater. First, everybody who's going to be an aquanaut has to go through training. Because one of the things about living underwater, once you start living underwater, you can't come back to the surface until you go through 17 hours of decompression. Otherwise, you risk getting the bends and decompression sickness, which could be deadly. So one of the things you have to learn during the week of training is how to respond to things underwater. You know, what if you get lost? When you're a diver and you get lost, your normal reaction is, oh, I'll just pop to the surface and see where the boat is. You can't do that. So one of the things we have at the Undersea Lab is an undersea, basically a highway system of cables that sit just above the sea floor. Here's the station. This is Conch Reef. These are depth contours. This is seaward. This is landward. This rectangle represents the lab. And these are like cables that sit above the sea floor, so they're like a highway. So when you're going to go out and do your work, you use those cables for navigation. You also train to use very specialized equipment when you're living underwater, and everything that you're going to use inside the habitat has to go down in one of our special pots. So from your computers to your instrumentation to your toothbrush, it all must go down in one of these very special pots. And our staff, before the mission begins, they dive down with scuba gear, they bring everything down, and let me tell you, they're good. They can put just about anything down inside one of those pots. Somebody told me, they said to me, it was pretty funny, they said, is that before or after decompression? Well, one of the really cool things about the Undersea Lab is that you're in the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, and you're in a research-only zone, what we call no-take. So there's no recreational diving, there's no fishing, there's no recreational visits, and so there's an amazing amount of fish life around the Undersea Lab. And not only are they abundant and healthy and big, they're acclimated to divers. In fact, we've had to instill a new rule. See these Goliath groupers? We have several very large resident Goliath groupers. The new rule is no hugging of the groupers. They are so acclimated to divers. In fact, we have one of our staff named, we call him Otter. For some reason, the groupers really like Otter. We don't know why, but Otter will go out and work, and the groupers will sidle up next to him, waiting for him to scrape stuff off the habitat, but they like to sit right next to him. They will let you pet them. I've seen people hug them. They weren't supposed to. But one time, I was actually down on a grating, and I was lying down with scuba gear, and one of these huge groupers came up to me, and it sat right in front of me and opened its mouth. And it must have thought I was at what's called a cleaning station, where you get little fish that clean the inside of the mouth for the fish. And I'm sitting there going, no, I'm not a cleaner. But then, I literally could look down its mouth, and I was like, tonsils? Does he have tonsils? And then I got so tempted, I was thinking, I could pretend to be a cleaner. I could stick my hand in its mouth and take parasites up. And then I just thought, what if I stuck my hand in there and it closed its mouth, and all my colleagues would come down, and I'd be sitting there with my hand in the grouper's mouth. I was like, maybe not a good idea. So I just enjoyed looking down his throat. So here's a diagram of what the inside of